All right, play it forward, people. We are back with Devi Brule, director of a short film called Still, and you were nominated by Oriana Milne. Thank you so much for being on the show. It's really a pleasure to have you.
My
Um,
pleasure.
Still is a very elegantly directed film. It's certainly highly crafted and very professional, and it was nice to watch. So I'll just
Uh-huh.
jump right into the first question to play it forward, which is, what was the emotional, artistic, spiritual inspiration for making the film?
Yeah, thank you for the question. This was an unusual piece how it came to me. I was sent the script. I wasn't the writer on this one, although I do enjoy writing very much. And the script had elements to it that I loved the visuals that were in it, and I loved the intercutting between these different scenes, especially these beach, waves rolling in, and all of that had a built-in metaphor to it. But that initially, those visuals was what drew me into the story, and it was very personal to the writer, Hillary, who also stars in the film and does a beautiful job with that. So it was being drawn in by those visuals and wanting to kind of bring a life to that internal space that she inhabits in the story, that her character inhabits.
Yeah, and it's definitely well depicted. That um, tension and confusion and just heartache of a relationship that's just crumbling, breaking on the shores, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And
That her internal reflection time, that she's letting the waves do this sort of cleansing process with her.
okay, cool. And what is it that going a little bit more, I guess, deeply into what you just described, that imagery, what is it that imagery means or represents to you in your life experience with this topic?
Mm. Mhm. Yeah, I feel like over time it took a while to articulate this for myself and to discover it, but I'm really interested in intimacy and in relationships, but also in a broader sense. So in my filmmaking, I realized at first that I was making these images on other films that were very um, close up detail of skin or physically intimate with a character, not even between two characters, but just between a camera and a subject. And I realized that I was doing that, and then also um, was very compelled by the relationship between characters of course, films that I'm watching, but also, what is really at the heart of a relationship between two people on screen. And this is such a personal story, and it's just about these two people in this very private existence in this bubble. And so I think that I was interested in exploring that intimacy between them, even though it is crumbling, like you say, and it's kind of breaking apart, and seems to kind of, they reach this impasse. It's irreparable ultimately, but that along the way you get this internal sense of what the characters are going through, with the camera being like right there with her. So that's part of what I meant with the visuals, was being drawn in and wanting to paint this world that felt intimate and that had this sort of immediacy, and this in this private internal process, which is sometimes hard to bring out of a character, right? It's You have movies that are very external, and then you have the difficulty of trying to bring out the internal life of a character, and how do you make that externalized in this very visual medium. And also audio can help a lot.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
in this
yeah.
case, it definitely played a big role. Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, no, I saw that and felt that in the film, and also certainly connect with what you're saying. I mean, I think it's, how do you go beyond the surface of identity and get to the that substance that is a very subjective, still often place in individuals, and what does that quality feel like, and how is it kind of different from person to person?
Yeah, subjective is definitely the word.
Yeah,
It's making that subjective experience come through for the audience, even though you can't step into someone's life exactly. But all this, the language of details, right? The language of these little moments, and that's what I was looking for. Really.
yeah, yeah, and it definitely came through, that imagery. Yeah.
Cool.
Um, I think I'll kind of just probe a little deeper into that question, before we go on to the next one. Really, that why do you think that's what you're after?
Mm. With the intimacy part.
Yeah, what is it that you're trying
Oh,
to explore, figure out, or touch, or gauge, or understand?
actually, I'm really glad that you asked. I think we live in a world that is. It's very easy for people to be disconnected from themselves and sometimes from each other because we're going 100 miles an hour. Everybody's got goals. Everybody's focused on their individual life and success and family and trying to maintain relationships within that of all different kinds. And we move fast. The internet changed so much of life on Earth, basically. And and I think as much as we are very connected in, quote unquote, oh, everything's connected and instant, and you can email anyone in the world and you can Skype or Zoom with anybody. And yet I think there's a lot of depression and there's a lot of um, people feeling disconnected from themselves or their own instincts even, and that sense of loneliness even when you're with people that a lot of people I think have at least experienced or maybe continually identify with if they're really struggling. And the this feels like this idea of intimacy and understanding and connection is the antithesis of that. It's an antidote to that, and I think that people find an incredible emotional comfort when they feel those emotions and when they feel connected to something or someone, certainly someone in their life. But I think that it can really exist with relating to a character on screen and feeling that there is an intimacy with that person, just raw, going through an experience that is difficult for them. And we find ourselves in those characters and in those moments in this inexplicable way that is based on empathy. It's these universal moments that you know, like screenwriting books talk about. It's this very specific moment, but that also translates into something that feels universal because it is specific. And you go, oh, somehow I see myself in that. And so there's a comfort and a. This is why storytelling is so important, right? It's there's um, you find what is true or feels more real, even if it's just by a hair. I think that finding um, that moment that can draw you in because it feels authentic when the world is going so fast and you're trying to keep up. And then for a moment, you can slow down, feel connected, feel like you maybe subconsciously even you remember yourself a little bit. I hope that makes sense, but it does, it
Yeah,
feels
of
important,
course.
it feels
Yeah, yeah,
I don't think I've ever actually tried to articulate it quite that way, but it's recognizing your own instinct about like, whoa, what am I drawn to? Oh, I'm curious about like this whole dynamic between people, and then going, oh yeah, that's why. Actually,
yeah,
it's really important and keeps
yeah,
us human, right?
for sure. Well, it's very well articulated, and I'm glad this is recorded
Thank
because
you.
anytime you get confused, you can go back and replay it. Be like, oh yeah, that's right. I said
Why am
that.
I doing this? Oh,
Right.
right. Okay, it's important.
Yeah.
Yeah, well said.
No, it's so true, and there's a lot that you packed in there, and a couple of things that stood out to me is how critical the intimacy is within oneself, you know, intrapersonal, and then there's that level of intimacy that's interpersonal, and
Yes.
both are so critical to our humanity and feeling connected to who we are and remembering that, and then carrying over into the median of film and connection through that portal, and an artistic portal where you can really experience a deep connection with yourself and who you are and as a human being. So yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Very important. All right, so moving on to the second question, and I'm still trying to craft this in an elegant way. It's only been like several 3 years or 4 years, but I think you'll find what I'm driving at.
Okay.
Um, you know, there's the production, pre-production, post, and through that entirety, there's this emotional story going on with the people that are making this movie. And there's that driving vision that director starts out with, and then there's a reflection that's going on when it's all packaged and delivered. So the question is, what do you feel you were trying to say? What was the meaning you wanted to convey, or the vision, whatever is kind of more accessible? But really, what is it, the message you wanted to convey as you were making the film? And then what do you feel the message was when the film was made, and in reflection upon looking at it? And were the two the same? Were they somehow different?
Mm, hmm. This was a unique project for me because it came to me written and I wasn't the writer. And I think part of why I said yes to the project was that the writer Hillary was she was very good at, I think, keeping an eye on what she did want to say with her original story, but also was really receptive to some of my notes because I explained them in a way that I think that she understood. And she went, "Oh, no one has said that about the script so far. Okay, interesting. Let's look at that dynamic." So that openness was great. And it's funny because I think my intention going in was that I wanted to breathe life into this story that I felt was hers, and I really respected that it was hers. And I just wanted to create something that felt honest, even if it was only in certain moments that I could achieve that. I wanted to approach these characters with empathy and not create a bad guy, right? Because in so many, even if it's a romantic story like this one is, there's kind of this idea of the bad guy, even if it's not an overt villain kind of thing. And that's something I've done on other short films as well, where someone actually pointed out to me on a different film that's what you're doing. You're humanizing these characters despite whatever their actions are. You're not judging them and you're not making things black and white. And I really enjoy that. And realizing that was like, oh, yeah, it's really important. I love that because life is not black and white. I think if anything, that's everything feels gray to me so much of the time. So I wanted to bring just an honesty and I think that our conversations in prep during our rehearsals and discussion of the script was it wasn't overtly centered around that, but in my mind, that was a lot of it was just how can we do something that feels honest. So it's funny because that's not, I don't know that that is even the answer that you might be looking for, because if you're a writer and you're coming out with a story, especially in her case that's so personal and she has these like very particular reasons for writing that I wouldn't get into or assume, but that I sensed that it was coming from this personal place, and so I just wanted to honor that, and I wanted to create something that felt truthful. And I almost went, well, this is a good exercise because if I'm not the writer and I basically had some influence on shaping the character, shaping the scenes, and how the intercutting worked a little bit, or the particular emotions within the scenes. So I was a guiding force, but was mindful that it was not my intent to completely take over. And in terms of looking back on how it came out, I don't know if I get to be a judge of that. I'm not sure. I think that it depends on people's individual responses to the scenes and how they flowed together. And there were things certainly that I was very proud of, especially working with my DP on that, Adam, who interestingly, he was already attached to the project actually when I came along. I came on kind of late in the game, and really enjoyed working with Adam, and the whole team was. I mean, being on set was great. Everybody was really, really supportive and came together. And despite none of us having like most of the people on set I had not worked with before, and yeah, so I guess other people get to judge in terms of how that truthfulness came across or failed. I think with every project we have to look at what worked, and like what just didn't work, what was either, maybe sometimes I'm a harsh judge about my own work, absolutely all the time, or if something you think is going to go a certain way, even if it's just some stuff within a particular scene, and then you go, like, that kind of came out how we wanted it to, and kind of didn't, and how could we work with it in the edit, right? Because at a certain point, unless you're doing pickups, that's like what you have. You just go, okay, creative editing,
Sure,
awesome.
sure, for sure.
So
How do you fill in the gaps?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Well, what I mean is, I think, and I'm going to keep on this second real area of
Okay.
conversation a little longer. And as um, an artist, saying that about myself, and and the way I just define that as somebody who's creating communications that are made with emotion and logic. So there's
Uh,
reason, but there's some other quality that you put into it that we can discuss at a later time. So
mm,
and whether that, and all art forms are means of communication, they're modes of communication. There's something there, right? You make a painting
yes.
and it's communicating something. And artists kind of don't, a lot of them, or at least historically, are seeming so, they try, well, I'm not going to give away my message. You're the viewer, you figure it out, you kind of go there yourself. But I'm kind of
Mm.
calling a little bit of bullshit on that, because um whenever you're there is something that an artist is channeling, and they may not be aware of the message. They might, their intentionality may fluctuate, based on their nature. um but there is a guided presentation in one way, form, or another, that is communicating something. So then we have to talk about the nature of what is that communication. And here we have two lovers that are at the end of their rope, and they're dealing relatively civilly with one another. Um, and they've tried some ways to salvage a relationship. So when we look at it at that story level, what is the communication? Whether you as a director or the writer or whatever, what is that message that's embedded in the film that a viewer would potentially take? Like, one would be, well, the actor says, what does he say? Oh, sometimes love isn't enough, or something like that. you know um well, so that's a message. So that may not be the message of the film, but if you had to try to talk about the message of the film to you, for you, before or
Mhm.
after, what is it for you?
Yeah, yeah, I hear what you're saying. I think in my own life, I have had to adjust to living within several different contexts that, and still to this day, absolutely true, that contain so much uncertainty. So the uncertainty factor is never comfortable, and you have to find a way to live within that. Or I guess the alternative is that you go and you make a choice, and you go and you seek comfort in a different form somewhere else. But but in the unfolding of the story that we're watching here, still it is this uncomfortable, that is the tension, right? There's always has to be tension in a story that is, I think, of merit, whether it's large or small tension. And in this case, it's this very interpersonal, your whole life is wrapped around somebody if you've known them for 10 years plus. And um yeah, and their dynamic together, let me think about this. It's that uncertainty factor that she in particular is having to live with, but both of them. And so that was one thing that I connected to and very much
Mhm.
related with. And then ultimately, it is having to accept when someone is not in the game with you. If they're just not, if they're not there, which of course is feels like a worst case scenario almost, right? Like if you're in a marriage and the other person is just not going to show up, they don't want to put in the work, you can't make them, which is my gosh, like so frustrating when you're invested to a certain point and you've gone through certain things, you've invested at all these different levels with a person, and then they just don't want, they're not in the game anymore.
Yeah.
And so then it's not fun, obviously. And it's not that marriage is supposed to be a fun ride, but the pivot of what is my choice then? So in her situation, like
Mhm.
she is the protagonist of the film and it's her story. And what are you gonna do if all you can do is be self-responsible, right? Which is for me that's a huge part of my life is okay, here's the scenario. I could blame lots of other people for whatever's happening that I don't like, or I could just kind of buck up, so to speak, and make a choice. I'm just gonna
Yeah.
make a choice based
Yeah.
on me and what I need. So
Yeah.
so for her in the story, it's really uncomfortable. She doesn't want to do that. But once it reaches this point and she kind of goes,
Yeah.
okay, I'm not gonna have the
Yeah.
wool pulled over my eyes anymore. I'm gonna have to
Yeah.
do
Yeah.
something here.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
then things
Yeah.
can shift, right? You
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
get out of that.
Yeah.
There's a break. And
Yeah. Mhm. Mhm.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it's
it's
beautiful. It's like because the meaning is really like when the flower blooms, you know, and when you start talking about okay, yeah, relationships, right, whatever, but when you start talking about uncertainty and having to live with that as a human on multitudes of levels, and then
yes.
acceptance, and then by way of coming to truth you can arrive at acceptance. Now
Mhm.
that's something that's resonant beyond the individuality of relationships.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
I love the way that you put that actually. The truth and the acceptance of it is because we do fool ourselves, right? I
Sure.
think all of us can relate to that. Where you're either in relationships, you're in it too long, or you all kinds of scenarios, I think.
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
go, oh well, this is okay,
Yeah.
or no, it's actually like this, it's like this. And denial is like an incredibly powerful force, but
Yeah.
then facing something more squarely and
Yeah.
knowing, okay, actually, if I allow that truth to surface and I do
Mm.
acknowledge that, like what does that shift in me? And then you're making a choice from a very different place where
Yes.
rather than this uncertainty and also
Yes.
stagnation, there's this, it's like this clarity of like,
Yeah.
okay, difficult, but like now I have a path. Now I'm gonna walk this way,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is this kind of like a catharsis almost. That's
For
a
sure.
relief to at least not be stuck in the same place anymore. So at the close of the film, that's this ending where we return to the beach and
Yeah.
it's like beautifully captured. Just the DP was really really
Yeah.
awesome.
Beautiful.
Very rushed
Beautiful.
day, but yeah, she's has these like elegant moves with her hands and her fingers and the way that she looks up at the sky, and it is a part of that process of
Yeah.
relief and renewal and rebuilding.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think films need to contain elements of that. Not every single film, of course, but
Sure.
it's breath of fresh air, right?
For sure. For sure.
Yeah.
Sure. All right. Last question. How have you been changed by making this film?
Hmm. I think I learned a lot of things. How have I been changed?
Or how have you changed putting choice into it?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, well, I learned various things. I think you learn and you relearn certain
For
lessons,
sure.
right? So some of them were, for instance, like the cutting and the recutting of scenes and that it is just like writing, you know,
Yeah.
the edit is this rewriting process, and
Yes.
that that's where the scenes are found.
Yep.
So that's something that I carry with me, of course, and I have to always embrace, because you always go, oh, are we still gonna are we still doing this on other films as well? And and there was a certain, you know, with the post production process, I think there were some moments that I really loved from the footage that are not in the final film, and so along the way, I wound up feeling in part that there were some missed moments that just were very beautiful, or that communicated a little bit differently what was there, and there were some choices and conversations about that that I had to let go. I had to be okay with letting go of that and not making it like the end of the world.
Oh, that's tough.
But you know, oh,
Yeah.
okay, so we don't have that. So like in the moment, it's hard because everything feels very personal and immediate,
Yeah.
and you go, oh no, and like you're very invested when you see the potential of something, and then that letting go is, maybe that's equally important. Just go,
Mhm.
okay,
Yeah.
okay, well, you know what, also this is Hillary's story to begin with, and through the whole process from beginning, being on set, in the end, I took the directorial chair and had no problem leading the team, but I wanted to keep in mind that I wasn't trying to rewrite the entire thing or like dominate everybody else's artistic decisions. It was a collaboration. So
For
that was,
sure.
those are a couple things. I'm sure there's a lot more that I learned, but in terms of how it changed me, I think maybe that was more to do with, gosh, I mean, there's so much I was proud of with our prep. Like we pushed back the shoot date to make sure that we had enough time up front. Um, but I almost think I almost wish that we had had more time up front and weren't going so fast through the pre-production process, because for me, alignment and team are everything in terms, because I think that those relationships that you have in the lead up and the trust that you build together, whether it's with your actors, with your keys, with, you know, whoever's involved, that alignment is seeps into the making of the film.
Yeah, for sure.
So I always think about that after most projects, actually. That you know, I wish that we had more time to allow that process to be a little bit more relaxed, and that we really were on the
Yeah,
same page about certain things, not just artistically but also personally, you know,
for sure.
to more time to solidify those friendships and working relationships.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. All
yeah,
right.
that's
Cool.
off the top of my head. So
I know. I know. We didn't talk about any of these questions in advance. You had no time to study or prepare. So
all good, all good,
you've
all
done
good.
very well. A plus.
Thank you.
Davy Brule. Thank you so much for being on Play It Forward. It's a pleasure to meet you. A pleasure to have you on the show, and an honor. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's lovely to meet you and speak with you, and thank you for such thoughtful questions.
That was my
Really cool.
pleasure. My pleasure. All right, we'll catch you later. Please keep us
All right.
posted on anything you're doing, and we'll be in touch as well.
Thank
All
you
right.
a million. Awesome.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.